Thank you all for coming. There has never been a time when what Michigan Atheists does and stands for was more important and necessary than what it is today. Unfortunately, our dynamic, energetic, very capable leader, Arlene Marie, the love of my life, died suddenly of a sudden, unexpected heart attack. And for various reasons, I have been unwilling to continue where she left off. Fortunately, we have Steve and Joyce Uitti who have organized this convention. Unfortunately, we have a very religious vice president who, if he ever becomes president, I'm sure will impose his religious values on all of us in total disregard of the First Amendment of our Constitution, which clearly states Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or preventing the free exercise thereof. How much clearer can this be? We also now have a very radical Supreme Court justice who has stated that he will be making pro-religious decisions. Atheists know that most wars and world problems are caused by, for, and because of religion. Our prisons are full of the religious, and every thinking person knows that the religious, in religions all over the world, are the most violent, irrational, hateful people on earth. Michigan Atheists exist because of the tireless, extremely difficult work of my good friend Henry Marty. Henry is not here today. Henry started Michigan Atheists in 1975 when there were no computers and no internet. All written correspondence had to be performed on stencils and run off on mimeograph machines. Each stencil was good for about 200 copies, and if more copies were wanted, another stencil had to be made. I guess that's all I have to say, and thank you.
And now a few words from Joyce Uitti.
Well, welcome to the 29th Annual Convention. Yes, we had a big break between the last one when Arlene Marie was. I really am understanding what Arlene and George have done for this organization, because this is the first convention we've ever done, and man, I feel for them. This is a lot of work. So my name is Joyce Uitti. I am a lifelong atheist, actually a fourth generation atheist as far as I know. I just know that my great-grandfather was. And I have never been involved in any organizations until this one. And that was about 5 years ago that I joined. And very happy that I can be here and continue their work with separation of church and state. I first want to say thank you to the Society of Humanistic Judaism, the Birmingham Temple, and Suzanne Paul for starting the Center for Secular Humanism. I also would like to say that I was very happy that Jennifer Behan, who is probably sitting back there, who is the program director for CFI, had come here and done a leader meeting, which was to get all of the secular groups in the Detroit area together so that we can work together on issues and share activities and costs and stand together as a whole, especially with the religious right, coming at us. We really need to stand together. So we continue to have our monthly meetings, do our tabling, art fairs, have an annual picnic, which is coming up June 11th, by the way, and we are working on a new book. Marty Maier back there is still putting up the Atheist Speak Up show, and by the way, we're always looking for new speakers for our meetings and for the show. And new board members are always welcome also. That's about it. We can start with, Marty's going to be coming up and introducing our first speaker.
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you for coming here. It's the first convention we've had since the era of Arlene Marie, and it's nice to see a lot of people here, new faces and old faces. Some of them have been here before. I was part of Michigan Atheists. When I was first joined Michigan Atheists, there were only 3 groups in the state. There was a group in Flint, there is the group that is now CFI, there was a free thought group in Grand Rapids, and us. And now there are so many more groups, and a lot of them in Southeast Michigan, but also spread throughout the state with their own little niche, and we've been trying to work together with many of those. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gregory Forbes. Aside from a lifetime of work as a professor of biological sciences, Dr. Gregory Forbes has been an activist involved in many different projects. Dr. Forbes has served as the Education Director for the Michigan Evolution Initiative, a statewide initiative designed to help teachers effectively teach evolution. He also served as the Director of the Institute of Evolution Education and as the Evolution Education Specialist for the 4,000-member Michigan Science Teachers Association, who named Dr. Forbes as the College and University Science Teacher of the Year in 2004. He was also named the Civil Libertarian of the Year in 2005 by the Michigan ACLU and was awarded the 2006 Freethinker of the Year by what is now CFI Michigan. We have recently seen a change in the United States where science is under attack not only by citizens but by our own government. The topics commonly challenged are climate change, vaccinations, and evolution, to name a few. The public's failure to understand science has significant societal, environmental, and intellectual consequences. In this presentation, Dr. Forbes will examine some of the many challenges that are also presented in an attempt to thwart evolution education and the acceptance of evolution theory in our own society. I'd like to introduce Dr. Gregory Forbes.
But anyway, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to this group once again, and thank you for having this conference again. It's an important thing to have, as we know, in Michigan, because as we know today, we have challenges and opportunities in today's social political environment for all things, not only on the religion front, but of course in the science front. Because as we've seen, for the first time in many years, we see science under attack in the United States, and we see, of course, corollaries between the acceptance of science and the acceptance of secular thought, etc. And so, as mentioned in the introduction, and thank you, Marty, for that, I've been involved for the last, since 1993, since moving to Michigan, on the movement to try and make sure that we have science in the science classroom. I know that seems like kind of an odd concept, but it becomes a challenge and something we constantly have to face here in Michigan. And the waters have been very quiet in Michigan and nationally for the last, probably 8 years as far as trying to get non-scientific information into the science classroom. And that's been identified as intelligent design, creation science, etc. We even had here in Michigan an organization which I'm on called Michigan Citizens for Science. And about 8 to 10 years ago, there was one bill after another coming out of our state legislature to try and have, equal treatment of creationism alongside evolution in our science classrooms. And now we're starting to see similar legislation with anti-climate change information being required to have equal time. And so we recognize those quiet times are over. It's the Wild West again here as far as assaults on science education. And so, if many of you, I know, went to the Science March several weeks ago, whether it was in Lansing, Grand Rapids, or the National March. And one of the great signs I saw there, of course, is science, not silence. And that's important, because when we hear information coming from our politicians, coming from our colleagues, coming from our professors, coming from members of the community, it just don't sit properly with what we know about science. It's one thing to say, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to, start a concern here, but it is an issue, because we know a world without science is a world that doesn't progress. So what I'd like to try and do with you today is spend a little bit of time here to talk about how to make responses to some of these claims. As I move along, how are we doing in the back? You folks in the cheap seats hear me? Good? Okay, good. And I want to point out that what we're going to look at here today represents some responses, scientific, theological, philosophical responses to claims that we see against evolution. Because how many times have you heard, for instance, that after all, evolution is just a theory, right? As if it conjures up images of, Roger Kipling's Just So tales. Well, what I wanted to say is arm you, if you will, with some responses to the common criticisms, the common challenges you see to evolutionary theory. And what we're going to do here as we go through this today is we're going to take a look at the first part here, questions related to nature of science. And these are questions that our students, that our colleagues, our members of society said, well, but wait a minute, if evolution is true, what about these questions regarding nature of science? Doesn't evolutionary theory conflict with nature of science? So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we're going to take a look here at questions relating to scientific knowledge. Sometimes you have challenges to evolutionary theory and say, well, the science is wrong because scientific fact says this and you're saying this. So we'll take a look at that. Then we'll do a capstone here with questions relating to religion or philosophy. Because we have to understand that science is only one lens through which we view the world. The traditional epistemologies, ways of knowing, are religion, aka theology, philosophy, and science. They all approach the view of the world through a different type of lens. And each one has a different benefit, each one has limitations. And science has a lot of limitations because science, of course, has to ask questions about the natural world that are testable, that are what? We're doing great for the quiz afterwards here. Because if it's not testable, it falls outside the purview of science. That goes to the theologians. That goes to the philosophers. And sometimes, people say, well, wait a minute. So you're saying if it isn't testable, it isn't true. No, we're just saying we toss out one of the philosophers. We toss out one of the theologians. Because science can only address aspects of our environment, aspects of nature that are actually testable. And that, of course, provides great limitations not seen by the philosophers, not seen by the theologians. So we want to take a look at that and see how, in fact, does religion and philosophy and science differ from each other in this context. Okay, so let's take a look at questions relating to nature science. So what I'm going to present to you here are actually questions that I've harvested from the many sources, websites, pamphlets, etc., that we see in the classroom that students bring to us and say, well, what about this? As what they see as challenges to science, challenges to evolution. And I've spent the last 15, 20 years with K through 12 teachers here in Michigan and other states, teaching them how to respond to these questions. Because we do want to produce an environment in the classroom where students feel comfortable asking these questions, right? We want to foster that environment. But we also want to make sure that our teachers and members of the community have appropriate responses for that. So many times you'll have students come in and they'll raise their hand in the question and say, I have a question, and you even know what the rest of the question is going to be because they printed it off a website. So what we're going to give you here are some of the greatest hits, okay? And sometimes students go, the teachers go, oh my God, I don't know how to answer that. We even see teachers who will not offer a full unit evolution because they're afraid they won't be able to respond to the questions because of their lack of maybe adequate background or just responding to the questions of that nature. So that's what we're going to do here. So you're going to be questions almost verbatim from these different sources, and many of you will go, and I recognize that one. There are some that are maybe the questions that you have that you'll be able to ask me when we finish here. So here's a question we had commented regarding nature of science. And I want to point out nature of science is different than the process of science, right? The process of science, which we always try and teach, is that there's a control, there's an experiment, there's a hypothesis. That's the protocol of science. Nature of science is different. Nature of science deals with the abilities of science, how science approaches the question, how science interprets data. It's not the recipe of how science is done, it's more the nature of science. So here's what we get. It says, isn't evolutionary theory unscientific, as science only deals with what can be observed occurring and not what has happened in the past? Therefore, questions about evolution can't be addressed scientifically because you can't see them happening. You get this a lot. You say, but how can you say that evolution's happened in the past because you can't see it happening today? Because in the lay public's mind, in something to be scientific, you actually have to observe it happening. And that is not really the case. I'm going to give you some answers. So we have A1 up here. You see, answer 1, answer 2. First of all, science is not limited to the observation of an unfolding event. A lot of fields of science are actually forensic in nature, they're historical in nature. For instance, what's the relationship with the smoking gun over here? How about if we have two people locked in a room and we hear bang, and we open the door, there's a dead person on the ground, bleeding with a bullet hole in him, somebody holding a smoking gun. We didn't see it, but are we pretty confident what the sequence of events was there from the forensic evidence? Yes, right? Well, we don't have to be there. And that's the case also with many fields of science. In fact, most fields of science are historical in nature. How about geology? I mean, do we actually see geologic events happening most of the time? In another lifetime, I was a geomorphologist, somebody who studied landforms, volcanoes, earthquakes, etc. And that's nice when the earthquake has the ability to happen in front of you, or the volcano erupts in front of you. But in most cases, geology is a historical science, isn't it? We look at events in the past as a key and a lens to what might interpret to happen in the future. Same thing with paleontology. When's the last time you saw paleontology happen in real time? By definition, right, it's the study of paleo, old stuff, right? It's the study of historical events. Archaeology doesn't happen in real time, does it? Astronomy, when you look up in the sky, go, oh, there's a star twinkling at me in real time. No, that light left that emitting body hundreds of thousands of years ago. Cosmology, not cosmetology, cosmology, okay? And evolution, most of these are all historical aspects of science, and that's okay. So people need to understand that you don't have to see it happening in real time to know that it happened. The analogy I always, the simile I used to bring up is that, how about your conception? Do you remember your conception? Remember back in the minivan at the drive-in where mom and dad? Okay. I'm just saying, okay? You go, well, I don't remember that. Aren't you evidence of your own conception? But nobody was there unless your parents were into, so nobody was there, right? But you're evidence of that historical event. This is how a lot of science operates. Another answer to that same question, that challenge is, some laws and theories in science cannot be observed directly, although their effects can. How about gravity? Have you ever seen gravity happen? No. You can take a cat, for instance, okay? And if you drop the cat out of the tree 5 times in a row, which way's the cat gonna go? Down. Some of the time or all the time? All the time. Does that gravity happen, or are you seeing the effects of gravity? You're seeing the effects of gravity, right? But we know that if you should do this with every cat you find, okay? Okay, and you'll see that they go down every time. It's the effects of gravity you're seeing. Particle physics, when's the last time you saw an electron? When's the last time you saw an intron, a neutron? Right? But we see evidence of them. Black holes, ever see a picture of a black hole? No, there's a reason. Because light doesn't come out of them. You can't take a picture of them, okay? But we can infer your existence as being there. How about this one? If evolution is really science, can a controlled experiment be done to test for evolution? Well, the problem we have there is another misunderstanding of science. Our first answer is, contrary to popular beliefs, and this K-12 science teachers just crinkle and cringe when I say this, not all scientific inquiry involves controlled experimentation, or even experimentation at all. But that's how we teach it, right? You have a control, you have an experiment, you have variables. The reality is, in another lifetime, I worked on sea turtles in Australia, okay? And I did that for one of my doctorates was on sea turtles. I could not tell my sea turtles, you're the control group, you guys feed on this side of the island. You're the random group, you guys do this. But we can collect the data and analyze the data. So in reality, is a lot of science actually isn't done with experimentation. It's analysis of data that exists in nature already. And many times when data is collected and experiment is produced, sometimes you can't always have a control. So you don't always have to have controlled experimentation to get the information. However, science does always involve testing hypotheses. Whether it's a controlled experiment, whether it's an experiment, or we're just analyzing the data, we're always testing a hypothesis. Can we test the hypothesis that today's whales, cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises evolved from tetrapod, 4-legged ancestors? Yes. Do you have to see it happen? No. Can we look at the forensic evidence in the geological record? Yes. Take a trot over to University of Michigan Natural History Museum. They have wonderful examples of what are called archaeocetes, archaeo, ancient sea whale. And we see this beautiful fossil history of tetrapod ancestors giving rise to today's whales. Did you have to hang out for a couple 100 million years and watch this happen personally? No. Okay? We can look at the forensic evidence. Was there any controlled experiment? No. Was there any experiment at all? No. But can't we analyze the data? Yes. Case made. Okay. Another question you get from students and the community, you go, science has a history of mistaken ideas, such as the Piltdown Man, such as cell membranes. Used to tell us cell membranes were rigid. Oops. Okay? A static lithosphere. The Earth didn't move. Oops. Electrons moved in predictable orbits. Oops. Okay, so why should we believe you now about evolution? Because you guys have been wrong before. Well, that's one of the great things about science. Science is self-correcting. Before I go to the response, I want to point out one of the famous scams here in science. If any of you are familiar with Piltdown Man, the skull we see on the right-hand side, this is a scientific fraud perpetrated here by Charles Dawson and Arthur Smith Woodard. Charles Dawson was during the last century, the most famous archaeologist, but he was an amateur. And it was amazing how he kept finding everything that nobody else could find. There's a reason. He was fabricating it. And so you say, well, you guys lied about Piltdown Man. Why should we believe you about evolution or climate change? Because an important quality of science is self-correcting. My students are uncomfortable with this. They say, so in science, we draw conclusions pending, here's the caveat, and it's a wonderful get out of jail card. We draw conclusions based upon the current data, pending data to the contrary. So they go, whoa, whoa, whoa. So you're telling me, scientists, you say it's so until you change your mind? Yeah! Isn't that a comfortable place to be? Does that happen in philosophy? Does that happen in theology? No, it does not. You say, we made this decision way back when, and data to the contrary, we're going to stick with the original one. No! I mean, we used to tell you that chocolate was bad for you. Well, it still is, but it's a little not as bad for you as we thought before. We get new information and we change it. And so what we see here in science, we fix our errors. For instance, we used to teach you that electrons moved in predictable orbits. Oops. Okay? They don't. Does that destroy atomic theory? Quite the opposite. It makes atomic theory more robust and greater predictability. We used to tell you that cell membranes were rigid. Oops. Did that destroy cell theory? No. It makes it a better theory and more predictive. This thing right here, what's this thing in the middle? National Geographic's folly, called Archaeoraptor, a fossil that came out of China. They did a whole month magazine on this. They did a 60-minute special. They said it's a transitional link between reptiles and birds. They had a whole PR campaign. They had this model produced in the Washington headquarters. Then they decided to verify it. Cart before the horse. Oops. Okay, but then again, who is it that exposes this? And almost every time, it's scientists that say, we were wrong about this. Here's the new data. And that's what's great about science, it's self-correcting. But the other thing is that when people say, well, these guys as scientists, you get an idea. That's not how science works. Evolution is a theory and not an idea. And we say theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural environment that incorporates tested facts, laws, hypotheses. It's not a wild guess. Do you folks know what a swag is in science? S-W-A-G? Scientific wild guess. Okay? And so that's not how science operates. So when you say, well, it's just a theory, then you say, I have a theory that Amway stock is going to go up. You run with that. Okay? But in science, theory is very, very different. So when people say, well, you guys have scientific theory, it's only a theory. We're not using it in a colloquial vernacular context there. Here's when you get loud. If science has all the answers, then where did the material from the Big Bang come from, and where did space come from? You almost need a toga and a yak festival to be drinking this and to figure this out. This is a deep, deep thought as to why, I don't know. What we have to understand is that science does not have all the answers. Science is never going to have all the answers, and that's what keeps us, we scientists, employed. Because what's always the last paragraph in every scientific article? Further research is required. In other words, give me another grant so we continue to answer this question. But the point is, we're never going to have all of the answers, and science isn't well equipped to answer the ultimate type questions like, why are we here? Why is space here? So can science give you a great idea of where all that matter came from initially? That's a little squishy. That's not really firm science. But can we take you from Big Bang to Big Brain? Oh, we've got you covered. From Big Bang to Big Brain, we've got you covered. Prior to Big Bang, a little bit of squishy at that point. Does that mean that you then say, we don't believe what you have to say from the Big Bang to the evolution of the mammalian big brain? No. We just have to understand that science can't answer all questions. However, we have to understand that unexplained by science doesn't mean inexplicable. Let me do that again. Unexplained doesn't mean inexplicable. The mere fact that science can't explain it now doesn't mean science won't be able to explain it in the future. Let's go back to the Greeks and the Romans. Every time they had a gap in their knowledge, what did they insert into that gap? A god, right? It's God of the Gaps Fallacy. We couldn't explain seasons, so we had what? A god of the seasons. We couldn't explain fire, so we had a god of fire. We had a god of the oceans. Every time we had a gap in our knowledge, we put a god in there because science couldn't explain it. That's a dangerous, dangerous protocol, because as science discovers how these events happen, what happens to the length of the line at the God Unemployment Office? It gets longer and longer and longer. So God of the Gaps is rotten science and it's really bad theology, because when science explains it, you have another unemployed God that you have to deal with. The same thing with fallacy of false alternatives. You go, well, if science can't explain it, therefore, ergo, option B is what? God, right? You know, either with the big G or the little g, choose your God. But, you know, the deity, some magical power. No, that's a fallacy of false alternatives. It's kind of like, you know, A, would you like to give me $1,000? B, would you like to give me $1 million? You're interested in option C now, aren't you, okay? No, those are only options, okay? So this fallacy of false alternatives, okay? So let's take a look at some questions related to scientific knowledge. This is where you get, usually high school, college students come in and say, I've been boning up on my websites, and I feel pretty confident to ask my biology, my geology, my science teacher, challenge them on the science. This is good. This is what we want. We want to foster that environment. We also want to have respectful responses to them. Here's what you hear a lot. By a certain politician who happens to be the vice president at this point, said, paraphrasing, if species increase in complexity over time, then why are there still extant primitive forms? Not his words, I cheated a little bit. Which is to say that if more advanced forms, we evolve from less advanced forms, why are there still less advanced forms?